The Middle East ceasefire is falling apart. For a brief moment, the Middle East appeared to be moving towards stability. After months of escalating violence, missile strikes, proxy warfare, and rising international pressure, hopes for a fragile ceasefire had finally begun to emerge across the region. Diplomats spoke carefully about de-escalation. Western officials pushed for restraint. Markets calmed slightly. Oil prices stabilized. And millions of people across the Middle East desperately hoped the worst might finally be ending. But now, those hopes are collapsing in real time. The region is once again sliding toward chaos. This week, Israel launched another wave of massive strikes across Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah positions near the southern border. According to multiple reports, dozens of people were killed as explosions ripped through residential areas, military sites, and infrastructure connected to Hezbollah operations. The strikes were not small. They were part of a much larger military escalation that many analysts fear could ignite a broader regional war. At the same time, Iran is accusing the United States of violating ceasefire understandings and quietly supporting Israel's growing military operations. Tehran claims Washington publicly talks about stability while privately helping fuel the conflict behind the scenes. And suddenly, the fragile balance holding the Middle East together is beginning to break apart. To understand why this situation feels so dangerous, it's important to understand how interconnected the region has become. This is no longer simply a conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. Behind Hezbollah stands Iran. Behind Israel stands the United States. And surrounding both sides are growing fears involving Syria, Iraq, the Persian Gulf, oil markets, and global military alliances. One strike can now trigger reactions across multiple countries within hours. That is exactly why world leaders are becoming increasingly nervous, because ceasefires in the Middle East rarely collapse slowly. They collapse violently. Over the past several days, Israeli forces have reportedly expanded military operations deeper into Lebanese territory while continuing strikes against Hezbollah targets. Israeli officials argue the attacks are necessary to stop future missile launches and weaken Hezbollah's military infrastructure before the situation grows even worse. But critics argue the strikes are escalating the crisis rather than containing it. As images of destroyed neighborhoods and civilian casualties spread online, anger across the region continues rising. Protest movements are growing louder. Anti-American sentiment is intensifying, and Iranian officials are now openly warning that continued aggression could trigger broader retaliation. That retaliation may not come directly, and that is what makes the situation even more dangerous. Modern Middle Eastern conflicts rarely operate like traditional wars. Instead, they unfold through proxy groups, cyber attacks, militia networks, covert strikes, drone warfare, and regional alliances operating across multiple countries at once. The battlefield is everywhere, and every escalation increases the possibility of a much larger chain reaction. Inside financial markets, the fear is already visible. Oil traders are closely watching every military development because the Middle East remains one of the most important energy regions on Earth. Investors fear that if tensions continue rising between Israel, Iran, Hezbollah, and the United States, global oil supply routes could eventually become threatened. That fear alone is enough to shake international markets because the world understands one terrifying reality. If this conflict expands, the economic consequences may spread far beyond the Middle East itself. Meanwhile, diplomatic negotiations appear weaker than ever. Publicly, world leaders continue calling for calm. Privately, many fear the ceasefire may already be beyond saving. And the deeper this conflict grows, the harder it becomes for any side to back down without appearing weak. That creates a dangerous political trap. Israel faces enormous internal pressure to appear strong against Hezbollah and Iran. Iran faces growing pressure to defend its regional influence. The United States faces pressure to support allies while avoiding direct war, and Hezbollah continues positioning itself as a force willing to escalate further if attacked. Every side believes backing down could damage its power, which means every side keeps moving closer to confrontation. That is why this moment feels so unstable. Not because war has officially begun, but because the systems preventing war are beginning to fail, and if the ceasefire fully collapses, the Middle East may once again enter one of the most dangerous periods the region has seen in years. How the Iran war could pull the world into chaos. The world is watching the Middle East with growing fear for one reason. History has shown that regional wars in this part of the world rarely stay regional for long. What begins as isolated strikes between Israel and Hezbollah can quickly evolve into something far larger. A chain reaction involving Iran, the United States, global oil markets, international shipping routes, cyber warfare, and world economies already struggling under inflation and instability. That is exactly why the current escalation feels so dangerous, because behind the explosions, missile strikes, and political statements lies a much bigger fear, the possibility that the Middle East is moving toward a conflict powerful enough to shake the entire global system. At the center of that fear stands Iran. For years, Iran has built a network of regional influence, stretching across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and beyond. Through allied militias and proxy organizations, Tehran developed a strategy designed to pressure enemies without always engaging in direct warfare itself. The strategy allowed Iran to expand influence while avoiding full-scale conflict with the United States or Israel. But now, the pressure inside that system is rising rapidly. As Israeli strikes intensify and ceasefire negotiations weaken, Iran is facing growing expectations from both allies and hardliners inside the country. Many believe Tehran cannot continue appearing passive while Hezbollah and regional allies absorb heavier military pressure. At the same time, Iran also understands the catastrophic risk of direct war, because a full confrontation involving Iran could instantly transform the entire region into an economic and military nightmare. One of the biggest fears involves the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important oil shipping routes on Earth. Roughly one-fifth of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow waterway. If military escalation threatens shipping traffic there, oil prices could explode almost overnight. Insurance costs for cargo ships would surge, global fuel prices would rise, inflation could worsen worldwide, and fragile economies, already struggling after years of instability, could face new economic shockwaves. That is why financial markets react so aggressively to Middle Eastern military news. This is not just about regional politics anymore. It is about the global economy itself. And the United States now sits directly in the middle of the crisis. Washington continues supporting Israel while simultaneously trying to avoid becoming trapped inside another major Middle Eastern war. But balancing those two goals is becoming increasingly difficult. Every American military movement, every statement from the White House, and every Israeli strike now carries international consequences. Meanwhile, anti-American anger across parts of the Middle East continues growing stronger. Iranian officials accused the United States of secretly encouraging escalation while publicly pretending to support diplomacy. Protest movements across the region increasingly frame America as part of the conflict itself, rather than a neutral power attempting to stabilize the situation. That perception is extremely dangerous because once major powers become psychologically tied to a conflict, de escalation becomes much harder politically. And then there is the issue of uncertainty. Nobody fully knows where the real red lines are anymore. Would Iran directly attack if Hezbollah suffers massive losses? Would the United States intervene militarily if Israel were heavily attacked? Could regional militias begin targeting American assets? Would shipping routes remain safe if escalation spreads toward the Persian Gulf? No government wants those scenarios to happen, but history has repeatedly shown that wars often grow through miscalculation, retaliation, and political pressure rather than deliberate long-term planning. And right now, the Middle East is filled with all three. That is why the current situation feels so unstable. The danger is not only the violence already happening, the danger is that every new strike increases the possibility of a much larger regional reaction. Every missile launch creates pressure for retaliation. Every retaliation creates new political pressure, and every escalation weakens the remaining diplomatic barriers, preventing a broader war. The world has seen this pattern before. More conflicts slowly turning into uncontrollable crises, regional instability transforming into global economic shock, governments believing they can control escalation until suddenly they cannot. And now, as tensions rise once again across Lebanon, Israel, Iran, and the Persian Gulf, a darker question is beginning to spread through world capitals. What happens if this war stops being regional and starts pulling the entire world into the chaos with it?